He looked at her name tag, then at her scuffed shoes and smirked. To Alexander Harrington, the waitress standing before him wasn't a person. She was a backdrop to his theater of superiority. He thought that by ordering in an archaic Provençal dialect, he could strip her of her dignity in front of his fiancée. He thought he was untouchable. He was mistaken. He didn't know that the woman balancing his wine glass wasn't just a waitress. And the word she was about to speak would not only silence the dining room, but shatter his empire. This is the story of how arrogance drowned in its own poison. The air inside the Beaumont Lounge, Manhattan's most exclusive dining room, smelled of aged Bordeaux, saffron risotto, and inherited wealth. For Sophia Langford, however, it mostly smelled of desperation. Sophia tugged at the collar of her crisp white shirt, which was too tight across her shoulders because she'd bought it a year ago when she still believed this job would be temporary. It was 8:47 p.m. on a Thursday. The evening service was reaching its crescendo. A symphony of baccarat crystal chiming against Limoges china punctuated by laughter that cost more per syllable than Sophia earned in a shift. Table 3 needs their Chateaubriand carved tableside. Table 5 is complaining that the truffle shavings are too thin. Move, Langford, move. The voice belonged to Reginald Pierce, the floor manager. Reginald was a man who believed that hesitation was a cardinal sin. He was currently stationed near the sommelier station, scrutinizing the wine list as though it contained nuclear launch codes. "Right away, Reginald," Sophia said, keeping her voice steady. She lifted a tray of champagne flutes, ignoring the burning ache that radiated from her heels to her lower back. She had been standing for 11 hours. Her shoes, polyurethane knockoffs from a discount store in Brooklyn, were splitting at the seams. The right sole had separated just enough to let in moisture every time she crossed the kitchen's perpetually damp floor. Sophia Langford was 28 years old. To the patrons of the Beaumont Lounge, she was invisible architecture. She was the hand that poured the Montrachet, the voice that murmured the evening specials, and the body that absorbed their condescension without flinching. They didn't notice the small scar on her left temple from where she'd fainted from exhaustion 2 months ago and hit the corner of a prep table. They certainly didn't know that 2 years ago, Sophia had been a doctoral candidate in comparative linguistics at the Sorbonne, one of 3 candidates selected for the prestigious Maison des Recherches Fellowship. Until the international call came at 4 a.m. Paris time, her father's stroke, the paralysis that claimed his left side, the medical debt that consumed her fellowship stipend, her savings, and finally her future. Now she wore a bow tie and answered to "Miss" from men who'd never read a book they didn't skim for investment tips. She approached table 7 with the practiced smile she'd perfected. Warm enough to seem genuine, distant enough to remain forgettable. The couple seated there radiated the kind of wealth that didn't need to announce itself. The woman, blonde and elegant in a rose-colored dress, wore ruby earrings that caught the candlelight. The man, dark-haired, sharp-jawed, impeccably tailored, sat with the posture of someone who'd never been told no in his life. Alexander Harrington. She'd heard Ethan whisper the name earlier, his teenage voice cracking with awe. "He's like a hedge fund guy. Billions with a B." Sophia set down the menus with practiced precision, noting the way Alexander's eyes traveled from her name tag to her shoes and back again. The journey took less than 3 seconds. But she felt the weight of his assessment like a physical thing. She was being measured and found insufficient. "Good evening," she began, her voice carrying the neutral professionalism she'd honed to a blade. "Welcome to the Beaumont Lounge. May I start you with something from our Provençal selection?" Alexander interrupted, not looking up from the wine list. "Vostra espèce d'irrisques una provoca." The words hung in the air like a guillotine blade. He'd asked about their oldest Châteauneuf du Pape Reserve, but not in contemporary French. He'd spoken in the language of medieval Provence, the extinct dialect of courtly poets. A linguistic relic that hadn't been spoken conversationally in 700 years. Across the table, Victoria shifted uncomfortably, her smile faltering. At table 4, a gray-haired gentleman in a navy suit lowered his newspaper. In the kitchen pass, Antoine, the head chef, froze mid-garnish. Alexander leaned back in his chair, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. He was waiting for her confusion, waiting for the moment she would stammer, apologize, perhaps fetch someone more qualified. Sophia felt something crack open inside her chest, something she'd kept locked and silent for 2 years. The part of her that had once debated Foucault in 3 languages. The part of her that had corrected a tenured professor on the evolution of the subjunctive mood in Occitan dialects. The part of her that had been erased line by medical bills and 12-hour shifts. She looked at Alexander Harrington, really looked at him, and made a choice. She would stop being invisible. Just this once, she would remember who she used to be. She opened her mouth, and the Sorbonne spoke. 2 years ago, Sophia Langford had stood in the marble atrium of the Sorbonne's linguistics department, holding an acceptance letter that felt like vindication. The Maison des Recherches Fellowship, full funding, access to archives that scholars waited decades to touch. Her dissertation proposal, Linguistic Erasure and Colonial Power, the Death of Occitan Dialects in Post-Revolutionary France, had been called groundbreaking by Dr. Moreau, a woman who didn't dispense compliments lightly. Sophia had called her father from a café in the Latin Quarter, her voice breaking with joy. Benjamin Langford, a veteran mechanic who'd worked in auto shops for 30 years to put her through undergrad, had cried. "My baby girl," he'd said. "My brilliant baby girl." 4 months later, that same phone rang at 4 a.m. Mrs. Patel from next door, her voice shaking. Benjamin had collapsed at the job site. A hemorrhagic stroke. The left side of his body unresponsive. The prognosis uncertain. Sophia had been on a plane within 6 hours. The fellowship money meant for research, for conference travel, for building a career went to medical bills instead. Then her savings. Then the fund her father had quietly set aside for her future. American health care, she learned, was a machine designed to devour hope. Physical therapy. $8,000 a month. The medications that kept him stable. Another $2,000. The care facility that was really a warehouse for broken bodies. $6,000. And they still left him in soiled sheets for hours. Her advisor had been sympathetic but firm. "We can defer for 1 semester. Perhaps 2, but the fellowship has conditions." "Sophia, you understand." She understood. She withdrew. Now she lived in a studio apartment in Queens where the radiator clanged like a prisoner rattling bars. On her kitchen counter sat an envelope labeled, "Dad Fund," in her own handwriting. $532 earned one humiliation at a time. It was barely enough for 1 week at the decent facility across town. The one where Benjamin might actually heal instead of simply existing. She'd been a scholar once, a linguist who understood that words were power. Now she was a ghost in a bow tie, carrying other people's food, absorbing their contempt with a smile that no longer reached her eyes. She had forgotten what it felt like to be seen as anything other than service until Table 7 reminded her. Reginald intercepted Sophia near the kitchen doors, his expression tight with the particular anxiety reserved for very wealthy, very difficult customers. "Table 7, he said, adjusting his already perfect tie. "Handle them personally. No mistakes." "Understood," Sophia replied, though her feet were already screaming. "I mean it, Langford. These aren't tourists celebrating an anniversary. This is money." Reginald's eyes flicked toward the entrance where a dark-haired man in a bespoke suit was handing his coat to the attendant. The woman beside him, blonde and elegant in rose silk, looked uncomfortable even in the act of arriving. Ethan materialized at Sophia's elbow, his 19-year-old face flushed with the excitement of proximity to wealth. "That's Alexander Harrington," he whispered, nearly vibrating. "He's like $3 billion hedge fund. He was on the cover of Forbes last month." "Wonderful," Sophia murmured, reaching for menus. Nadia, the bartender, caught her arm as she passed. "Good luck," she said, her Russian accent thickening with sympathy. "That one sent back 6 bottles last month," said R09. Margot tasted like bourgeois desperation. Direct quote. Sophia watched Alexander settle into his chair with the languid confidence of someone who'd never had to ask for anything twice. He didn't pull out Victoria's chair. He sat first. The sommelier Francois approached with the wine list. "Good evening, Mr. Harrington. May I suggest?" "No." Alexander didn't look up. "Milnovitra Vandizwe, and don't offer me mediocre substitutes." The phrasing was deliberately cutting, designed to establish hierarchy. The sommelier, a man with 30 years of experience, was being dismissed like a child who'd brought the wrong toy. "Of course, sir," Francois said, his French accent suddenly more pronounced, a tiny act of defiance that only Sophia seemed to notice. Victoria touched Alexander's hand. "That was a bit. I'm paying $400 for wine," Alexander said, finally looking at her. "I shouldn't have to educate the staff." Sophia approached the table with her practiced smile, the one she wore like armor. She set down the menus with precision, her hands steady despite the warning bells ringing in her mind. This man wasn't just wealthy. He was dangerous, the kind who used money as a weapon and language as a blade. She just didn't know yet that she was about to disarm him completely. Alexander studied the menu with theatrical concentration, making Sophia wait. It was a power play she'd seen 100 times. The deliberate silence, the forced hovering. Victoria looked at her apologetically but said nothing. Finally, Alexander spoke. He paused, his eyes lifting to meet Sophia's with predatory amusement. He wanted to know about the freshest oysters, but he demanded she respond in Old Provençal, the extinct dialect of 12th-century troubadours, not corrupted modern language. The table beside them went quiet. A woman in diamonds paused mid-sentence. "Ethan," refilling water glasses nearby, looked stricken. At the bar, Nadia's hand froze on the bottle of Campari she was pouring. In the kitchen pass, Antoine set down his knife with enough force that it rang against the cutting board. He'd been born in Lyon, descended from a family that could trace its roots to Provence. He knew exactly what Alexander had just done. This wasn't about ordering food. This was linguistic theater, a public execution disguised as dinner conversation. Victoria's cheeks flushed. "Alexander, I'm simply curious," Alexander said smoothly. "Whether the service here matches the prices. Surely someone working in a French establishment should understand French." The emphasis on the last word was razor sharp. He leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms, waiting. The smirk on his face said everything. "You're beneath me. You're uneducated. You're exactly what I think you are." Sophia felt the weight of every eye in the room. Reginald was watching from the host stand, his expression caught between concern and calculation. She could see him doing the math. Lose the waitress or lose the billionaire. The answer was obvious. She should apologize. Fetch someone else. Disappear back into invisibility where she belonged. But something in Alexander's smile, the casual cruelty of it, the assumption that she would crumble, ignited something she'd thought had died 2 years ago. Her voice, when it came, was steady as stone. "Messiah," Sophia began, her voice carrying across the suddenly silent dining room. "Vostra espas diriscas una provoca." Your question isn't about seafood. It's a provocation. The words came out in flawless old Provençal. The accent precise, the grammatical structure perfect. But she didn't stop there. Then she switched seamlessly into the aristocratic Parisian French of the Académie Française. "Nos waitress sont de Normandie, livrées ce matin. Mais permettez-moi de corriger votre prononciation. Vous avez utilisé vocable comme terme technique, alors Quarnout Daniel, le plus grand troubadour provençal, aurait utilisé mots dans ce contexte." Alexander's face drained of color. Victoria's hand flew to her mouth, but this time not in shock, in suppressed laughter. At table 4, the gray-haired gentleman lowered his newspaper completely, his eyes sharp with interest. Sophia continued, her voice like silk over steel. "La langue que vous essayez d'utiliser comme arme n'est pas un jouet pour impressionner les gens. C'est le vestige d'un colonialisme linguistique qui a tenté d'effacer les voix des opprimés. J'ai étudié cela pendant 4 ans à la Sorbonne. Et vous?" The silence that followed was absolute. Antoine emerged from the kitchen, arms crossed, a fierce smile on his face. Reginald stood frozen, caught between horror and awe. Alexander's mouth opened, closed, opened again. No sound emerged. Sophia set down her pen and pad with perfect composure. "Shall I give you a moment to decide, sir, or would you prefer I order for you in whichever language makes you most comfortable?" The rest of the service passed in excruciating tension. Alexander ordered in clipped modern French, his voice stripped of its earlier showmanship. He barely touched his food. Victoria ate in silence, occasionally glancing at Sophia with something that looked like gratitude. When Sophia brought the dessert menus, Alexander waved them away. "Just the check." She processed the payment at the server station, her hands trembling now that the adrenaline was fading. She'd done it. She'd spoken. And she was probably about to be fired for humiliating a client worth $3 billion. When she returned to table 7 with the leather check presenter, Alexander snatched it from her hands without looking up. He pulled out his Platinum American Express card. He signed the receipt with an aggressive slash and stood abruptly. Victoria rose more slowly, gathering her clutch. Then Alexander froze. His hand went to his jacket pocket, then his other pocket. His face shifted from confusion to something darker. "My card," he said loudly. Too loudly. "Where's my card?" Sophia blinked. "Sir, I put it in the holder. It's gone." His voice rose, cutting through the ambient noise of the dining room. Conversation stopped, heads turned. "Someone took my card." Reginald materialized instantly. "Mr. Harrington, I'm certain there's been a misunderstanding. She was the last person to touch it." Alexander pointed at Sophia, his fingers shaking, not with fear, but with rage. With the fury of a man whose ego had been shattered in public, and who now saw a chance for revenge. "Check her apron. Check her pockets. And I want the police called now." Sophia's blood turned to ice. "Sir, I didn't. You humiliated me," Alexander hissed, stepping closer. "Did you think I'd just let that go? You think because you memorized some dead language, you're better than me? You're a thief. Check her, Reginald, or I'll have your job, too." Ethan looked horrified. Antoine pushed through the kitchen doors, fury radiating from him. Nadia gripped the bar edge, her knuckles white. Reginald's face was ashen. "Ms. Langford, if you would to clear this up." Sophia felt the world tilting. Her father's face flashed in her mind. The dad fund envelope, everything about to disappear because she dared to be visible. Then a voice, calm and cold as winter, cut through the chaos. "That won't be necessary." Every head in the dining room turned toward table 4. Theodore Beaumont rose from his seat with the unhurried grace of a man who'd never needed to rush for anything in his 70 years. He was tall, silver-haired, impeccably dressed in a navy suit that probably cost more than Sophia's annual rent. His accent carried the faint trace of old European aristocracy, the kind that came from boarding schools in Switzerland and summer homes in Monaco. He walked toward table 7, and the room seemed to rearrange itself around him. Other diners leaned back instinctively, granting him passage. Alexander's expression flickered between confusion and irritation. "I'm sorry, but this is a private." "Mr. Harrington." Beaumont's voice was quiet, but it carried absolute authority. "I believe you're causing a scene over a credit card you claim was stolen." "It was stolen," Alexander snapped. "By her." He jabbed his finger towards Sophia again. Beaumont's eyes, pale blue and sharp, moved to Sophia for a brief moment. Something passed across his face. Recognition, but he turned back to Alexander without comment. "I see. And you're quite certain it was taken?" "I put it in the check holder. She took it to process the payment. When it came back, the card was gone. The math isn't complicated." Beaumont nodded slowly. "Indeed, mathematics rarely are. Tell me, Mr. Harrington, have you checked your own pockets?" Alexander's jaw tightened. "Of course humor me. Check again thoroughly." There was something in Beaumont's tone that wasn't a request. Victoria took a small step away from Alexander, her expression unreadable. Alexander made a show of patting his jacket pockets. "I already His hand stopped. His face changed. Slowly, he reached into his inner breast pocket and pulled out a Platinum American Express card. The room exhaled collectively. Alexander stared at the card as though it had materialized from another dimension. It must have fallen from the check holder into your pocket during the confusion. Beaumont's eyebrow arched. How remarkably convenient. Almost as convenient as publicly accusing an employee of theft immediately after she had the audacity to speak to you as an intellectual equal. Victoria's hand moved to her mouth. Alexander's face flushed crimson. Now wait just a... No. The single word from Beaumont landed like a gavel. You will not wait. You will apologize to this woman and then you will leave my establishment permanently. Alexander's eyes widened. Your establishment? My name is on the door, Mr. Harrington. Surely even you noticed. The color drained from Alexander's face as the pieces assembled themselves. Beaumont. The Beaumont Lounge. Theodore Beaumont, not just a restaurateur, but the chairman of Beaumont Financial Group, one of the oldest and most powerful private banks in the world. Mr. Beaumont, I apologize. I didn't realize. Alexander's voice had lost all its earlier venom. Now it was pure calculation, the scramble of a man trying to salvage a burning bridge. You didn't realize I was watching when you attempted to humiliate my employee using linguistic theater. Or you didn't realize I was present when you manufactured a theft allegation to retaliate against her. Beaumont's tone remained conversational, which somehow made it more terrifying. I'm curious which ignorance you're claiming. Victoria quietly removed the diamond engagement ring from her left hand and placed it on the table with a soft click. She met Alexander's eyes with something like relief. I'll call a car, she said and walked toward the exit without looking back. Alexander reached for her, Victoria, but she was already gone. Beaumont continued, unperturbed. I'm also curious about Vanguard Capital's debt obligations. $18 million in quarterly repayments to the Beaumont Consortium, if memory serves, due on the 15th of each month. Alexander went very still. Those are standard terms. Indeed. Standard terms that can be called in full with 60 days notice pursuant to Section 7. Paragraph 3 of your loan agreement. Through clause regarding moral turpitude and reputational risk to the lending institution. Beaumont adjusted his cufflinks. I wonder if falsely accusing someone of theft in a public establishment, my establishment, might qualify. You can't. I assure you I can. But I'm not without mercy, Mr. Harrington. I'll give you a choice. You can apologize to Ms. Langford with sincerity, leave quietly, and we'll consider this an unfortunate lapse in judgment. Or you can continue protesting, and I'll make a phone call that will have your credit lines frozen by Monday morning. Reginald looked like he might faint. Ethan's mouth hung open. Antoine stood with his arms crossed, nodding slowly. Alexander looked at Sophia. Something ugly moved behind his eyes. Humiliation, rage, the cornered animal awareness that he'd lost completely. I apologize, he forced out. The words came like broken glass. Beaumont's expression didn't change. To her, not to me. Alexander's hands clenched into fists. But when he looked at Sophia, his voice was barely a whisper. I'm sorry. Sophia said nothing. She simply watched as he gathered what remained of his dignity and walked toward the exit, his shoulders tight with barely contained fury. The dining room remained silent until the door closed behind him. Then Beaumont turned to Sophia, and his expression softened completely. "Ms. Langford, would you join me in the office? I believe we have much to discuss." Reginald's office was small but elegant, lined with wine awards and photographs of celebrities who dined at the Beaumont Lounge. Sophia sat in a leather chair, her heart still hammering, while Theodore Beaumont settled across from her with the ease of someone accustomed to command. 2 years ago, he began without preamble, I attended a symposium at the Sorbonne, Language as Colonial Weapon, Post-Revolutionary Linguistic Erasure in Southern France. You were one of 3 presenters. Sophia's breath caught. Your dissertation proposal was extraordinary. You argued that the systematic suppression of Occitan dialects wasn't merely cultural erasure. It was economic warfare designed to eliminate regional identity and consolidate Parisian power. He smiled slightly. I was so impressed that I asked Drive Moreau for your contact information. I wanted to offer you a research position at my foundation. I withdrew, Sophia whispered. My father. I know. Dr. Moreau told me about your father's stroke. I've been trying to locate you ever since. You left no forwarding address. Your university email was deactivated. You vanished. He leaned forward. Until tonight, when I heard you correct a billionaire's grammar in a language most people think is dead. Sophia couldn't speak. I'm establishing the Beaumont Institute for Cultural Preservation. Its mission is to document and protect endangered languages, with a particular focus on the political dimensions of linguistic erasure. I need a director, someone who understands that language isn't just communication. It's power, its identity, its survival. He paused. The position offers $185,000 annually, plus full benefits. Your father would receive care at the Beaumont Neurological Institute, our partner facility, the finest stroke rehabilitation program in the country. Private suite, 24-hour specialized nursing, whatever he needs. The words hit her like a physical force. Sophia's vision blurred. The dad fund envelope, the studio apartment, the shoes held together with hope and desperation. Her father alone in a facility that smelled like industrial cleaner and abandonment. Why? She managed. Because 2 years ago you presented research that could change how we understand power, language, and oppression. Because tonight you refused to be erased. Because the world needs people who remember that words matter, that they can liberate or destroy, elevate or humiliate. Beaumont's eyes held hers. And because your father deserves to hear his daughter's voice speaking the truth, not reciting specials to people who can't see her brilliance. Sophia's hands shook. For the first time in 2 years, she allowed herself to cry. When would I start? Beaumont smiled. Tomorrow, if you're willing. But tonight, go home. Rest. Tomorrow we change your life. 6 months later, Sophia stood in the doorway of Suite 304 at the Beaumont Neurological Institute, watching morning light stream through floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park. The room looked nothing like a medical facility. It looked like a home. Benjamin Langford sat in a cushioned armchair by the window, his left hand resting on a therapy ball, his posture stronger than it had been in 2 years. His physical therapist, Carla, was packing up her equipment, smiling at something Benjamin had just said. Because Benjamin was speaking now, real words, full sentences. Sophia crossed the room, her heels clicking on hardwood floors. Real heels this time, the kind that fit properly. She wore a charcoal suit and carried a leather portfolio embossed with the Beaumont Institute seal. Her hair, natural and unstyled for years, was now shaped into elegant locks that framed her face. "Hey, Dad." Benjamin looked up, and his eyes, clear now, focused, filled with tears. "Sophia." His speech was deliberate, slightly slurred on the left side, but unmistakable. "Sophia Lorraine Langford." He reached for her hand with his right, squeezing hard. "My daughter." She knelt beside his chair, pressing her forehead to his. "I'm here. I heard what you did. That restaurant." He smiled, the left side of his mouth catching up a moment later. "You spoke. You didn't disappear. I learned from the best," she whispered. "You never disappeared, Dad. Not once. You kept fighting." Her phone buzzed. A message from Liam, her research assistant. Conference confirmed. 150 registered attendees. Dr. Moreau confirmed keynote. "You're going to change the world." Sophia looked at her father, then out the window, at the city that had tried to make her invisible. She thought about Alexander Harrington, whose hedge fund had quietly collapsed 3 months ago under the weight of called loans and vanished investors. She thought about Victoria, who'd sent her a handwritten note, "Thank you for showing me I didn't have to be silent." She thought about the waitress she'd been, the ghost in the bow tie, the woman who'd forgotten she had a voice, and she smiled. "I was invisible once," she said softly, more to herself than to Benjamin. "But not anymore." Benjamin squeezed her hand again. "Never again." Outside, the city hummed with a million voices, each one carrying its own power, its own truth. And Sophia Langford, scholar, daughter, survivor, was finally, undeniably, unmistakably heard. But let's go back a bit further, to understand how Sophia's journey truly began. Long before the Sorbonne, before the fellowship, Sophia grew up in a modest home in upstate New York. Her father, Benjamin, was a mechanic who fixed cars by day and read history books by night. He instilled in her a love for languages from an early age, telling stories of his own grandparents who spoke Italian and French fluently. "Words are bridges, Sophia," he'd say. "They connect us to the past and to each other." Her mother had passed away when Sophia was 10, from a sudden illness, leaving Benjamin to raise her alone. He worked double shifts to afford her books and classes, encouraging her curiosity. By high school, Sophia was fluent in 3 languages and winning debate competitions. College was a revelation, majoring in linguistics at NYU, where she discovered the power dynamics behind language suppression. Her thesis on indigenous languages in colonial America caught the eye of recruiters for the Sorbonne's program. The fellowship was her golden ticket. In Paris, she immersed herself in archives, poring over ancient manuscripts. She made friends with fellow scholars, debated late into the night in cafes, and felt alive in a way she'd never known. Dr. Moreau became her mentor, pushing her to dig deeper into how governments used language policy as a tool of control. Then came the call about Benjamin's stroke. The flight back was a blur. Arriving at the hospital, seeing her strong father reduced to a frail figure in a bed, tubes everywhere, it broke something in her. The bills started piling up immediately. Insurance covered little. The rest was on them. Sophia sold her belongings, deferred her studies, and took the first job she could find, waitressing at a diner in Queens. But it wasn't enough. She moved up to the Beaumont Lounge after a tip from a friend, hoping the tips from the elite crowd would help. Her first shift was a disaster. She spilled a glass of water on a celebrity's lap, earning a glare from Reginald. But she learned quickly, adapting to the rhythm of the high-end service. Ethan, the young busboy, became her ally, sharing gossip about patrons. Antoine, the chef from Lyon, taught her French phrases to impress customers. Nadia, the bartender, offered vodka shots after tough nights. One particularly grueling evening, months before the incident with Alexander, Sophia had dealt with a table of investment bankers who treated her like furniture. One of them snapped his fingers for service, another commented on her exotic looks. She bit her tongue, smiling through it, but that night, back in her apartment, she cried over the dad fund envelope. "This can't be my life," she whispered to the empty room. Flash forward to the night in question. Earlier that day, Sophia had visited Benjamin at the subpar facility. He was having a bad day, barely responsive, the nurses overworked and indifferent. It fueled her resolve to push through another shift. Little did she know it would be the turning point. After the confrontation with Alexander, as the dining room buzzed with whispers, Sophia's colleagues rallied around her. Antoine clapped her on the back. "That was magnificent, ma chérie." Nadia poured her a drink, to the linguist who slayed the dragon. Even Reginald, usually stern, nodded approvingly. "You handled that better than I could have." In Beaumont's office, as he outlined the job offer, Sophia hesitated. "But my experience, it's been 2 years since I did any real research." "That's why you're perfect," Beaumont replied. "You've lived the erasure you studied. You've seen how language and power intersect in the real world, not just in books." The next day, Sophia resigned from the lounge. Reginald shook her hand. "We'll miss you, but go conquer the world." She moved Benjamin to the new facility that afternoon. The staff there were attentive, the rooms spacious. Carla, the therapist, worked miracles, incorporating language exercises into Benjamin's rehab since Sophia shared his love for words. At the institute, Sophia dove into her role. She hired a team, including Liam as her assistant, a sharp recent grad passionate about digital preservation of languages. They launched projects, digitizing Occitan texts, partnering with communities in southern France to revive dialects, hosting webinars on linguistic rights. The conference was a highlight. Dr. Moreau flew in for the keynote, praising Sophia's work. "You were my star student," she said. "And now, you're leading the charge." Meanwhile, Alexander's downfall unfolded in the news. Headlines about Vanguard Capital's collapse cited financial irregularities and lender pullouts. Rumors swirled of his desperate attempts to secure new funding, but doors slammed shut. Victoria, free from the engagement, started her own charity for women's empowerment, crediting Sophia's courage as inspiration. Sophia also reconnected with old friends from Paris, traveling back for collaborations. She published papers, spoke at TED-like events, and even consulted for governments on language policy. But the true joy was seeing Benjamin improve. They shared meals in his suite, discussing books and history. "I'm proud of you," he told her one evening, his speech clearer than ever. Years later, Sophia would reflect on that fateful night. It wasn't just about one arrogant man, it was about reclaiming her voice in a world that silences the unseen. She mentored young linguists, especially those from working-class backgrounds, telling them, "Your words have power. Don't let anyone make you invisible." And so, the story of Sophia Langford became legend in certain circles, a reminder that beneath the surface of everyday roles lie hidden depths, ready to emerge and reshape empires. In the end, arrogance met its match not in wealth or status, but in the unyielding force of knowledge and resilience.